We raised the firing rate to 95%. In the military, call it 70% in the law enforcement community. How did we do that? Well, there was a revolution, a true revolution in training that made using deadly force a conditioned response. The fundamental flaw in the training in World War II was this. We had our soldiers trained to fire at bullseye targets. Now, what's wrong with that? We have no known instances of any bullseyes ever attacking any of our soldiers, all right? What do you have to practice shooting at? Human beings. Or, if you will, man-shaped silhouettes popping up in your field of view. What we did was to make deadly force a conditioned response. When the midbrain has taken over, the forebrain has shut down, you will still do what you have been conditioned to do. We do that with pilots in a flight simulator. The next time you get on an airliner, know that 4 times a year, the pilot and the co-pilot of that airliner sit in a flight simulator for endless mind-numbing hours. They will sit there and a certain warning light will go off and they'll respond a certain way. Another light, another response. Stimulus response, stimulus response, stimulus response, stimulus response. Hour after hour after hour. Now, one day they're up in a real airplane. And all of a sudden they hit a wind shear and one engine goes out and they're going down and 200 people are screaming their lungs out behind them. These pilots are sincerely scared out of their wits. Well, that's what happens when the forebrain shuts down. The midbrain takes over. And yet they reach out and they do the right thing. Why? Because they've been conditioned to. That's what we had to do with our soldiers. And so today what happens is the conditioned stimulus is a man-shaped silhouette pops up in your field of view. You have a split second to engage that target. You hit the target drops. Stimulus response, stimulus response, stimulus response, stimulus response. A few hundred repetitions of that, and then in combat in Vietnam, when an enemy soldier popped up in front of our people, what did we do? Boom, we shot. It was reflexive. Today what pops up is a little Ivan doll. He's got a helmet, and he's got a face, and 2 little chubby hands hanging onto an AK-47, and he pops up in front of you, and that's what you practice shooting. In the law enforcement community, we discovered in the 50s and the 60s that the vast majority of law enforcement officers, like the soldiers in World War II, were not able to fire at the moment of truth, and so we did the same thing in the law enforcement community. What did we introduce? The shoot-no-shoot program with the rear projection movies, and you're shooting your weapon full of blanks at a rear projection movie. We introduced the Hogan's Alley with the lifelike targets that pop up. Stimulus response, stimulus response, stimulus response. And the more realistic the target is, the better it's going to be, and the better you are at transferring the skill over to reality. And like flight simulators, the fidelity of the environment is absolutely critical. Napoleon said that in combat, the moral is to the physical is 3:1. The psychological factors are 3 times more important than the mechanical physical factors. And winning the psychological battle is 3 times more important. When we address that combat and the realities of combat and the layers of denial, one of the first things we've got to realize is this. With very few exceptions, every war in this century, America has had more psychiatric casualties than physical casualties. More people have been psychologically unable to confront the battlefield, absolutely, totally debilitated, than those who were destroyed by enemy fire or wounded by enemy fire. What happens is we're placing people in combat for months on end, and you know what we're finding? For those who did not otherwise become casualties, after 60 days of continuous combat, 98% of all soldiers had become psychiatric casualties. The other 2%, they were sociopaths. The thing that exhausts you, the thing that causes that 98% psychiatric casualty is close-range interpersonal aggression. Bombs from 20,000 feet, they don't do it. But what does do it, what will set you off, is this interpersonal human aggression. There is one group of individuals in combat who are not suffering nearly the psychiatric casualties. They are chaplains and medics and corpsmen who are moving from position to position. And because of their job, they die at a higher rate than even us poor grunts out there on the ground. And yet afterwards, they do not suffer nearly the incidence of psychiatric casualties on the battlefield. Why? They're not doing the killing. The bottom line is this. You look another human being in the eyes, and you pull the trigger, and you watch them spin down, and you remember that face in your dreams for the rest of your life. You fail to do your job. You fail your friends. And what happens is you are responsible from that point on.